Mr. President, when I came onto the floor, you were not presiding, you were speaking on the floor and talking about the visa waiver program. It's an agreement we have with almost 40 other nations, which allow for the free flow of visitors from those countries to our countries. It's viewed in part as a way to promote tourism and to help grow that part of our economy and the economies of these other 38 or 39 nations with whom we have this agreement. Some people believe it's a gaping hole for fomenting terrorism and the ability, giving terrorists the ability to infiltrate our countries and do mischief here and other places around the world. I want to applaud the presiding officer, Senator from Missouri, for his comments and actually explaining how the system works. It's actually not just a way to enhance and promote tourism, important to all of our economies, but also it actually enhances our security done well, done right, and done correctly. And I appreciate very much as the former chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security. Appreciate very much you're making that making those comments today. I've come to the floor today. I'm going to do something today, Mr. President. I've never done this before, and I've never come to the floor and actually read a resolution or a piece of legislation that we're going to be voting on, I think, later today. And this is a resolution that came out of discussions yesterday as we contemplating voting on additional sanctions with respect to Iran, sanctions related not to their violations of the joint agreement on nuclear weapons. They appear to be in full compliance with what they professed to do, promised to do a year or two ago. There doesn't seem to be a question. They're doing what they promised to do, and that's good. There is what we believe is an obvious violation of a UN requirements that says the United Nations doesn't believe that Iran should be testing ballistic missile systems. And even though they have no nuclear weapons, we don't believe they're going to have them anytime soon, hopefully not, because that would help spark a nuclear arms race in that part of the world. But we still have, along with the UN, this prohibition against them developing and testing ballistic missiles. They have violated that a number of times, and a lot of other nations, including us, are concerned about that. And we have before us this week and again next week legislation dealing with that. My hope is that next week we'll consider that legislation, have a chance to offer amendments to it. My strong hope is that we'll not only be talking about our desire to see Iran fully comply with the UN guidelines, but we'll also couple with that legislation sanctions dealing with Russia. And this is a country that continues to make mischief in this country and countries around the world. We had a lot of attention riveted today on the testimony by former FBI Director Jim Comey on whether or not there was an attempt by the Russians to influence our elections, our presidential elections last year. All 17 intelligence agencies in this country have decided unanimously that the question is not only did they attempt to or want to influence the outcome of the presidential election. They all say yes. The answer is yes. All those agencies say yes. And the second thing they said is they feel that the Russians succeeded in what they wanted to accomplish, because the person they wanted to see defeated, Secretary Clinton, lost, and the person they wanted to see win, Donald Trump, won, and now serves as president of the United States. And the issue that's going on right now in the hearings before the Intelligence Committee are involved whether or not there was collusion between the Trump organization and the Russians during or prior to the time of the election. So ultimately we'll find out the truth, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. But I think we make a mistake in simply going forward and admonishing the Iranians for testing ballistic missile weapons, while at the same time this effort by the Russians to really make a mockery of our election system and change the governance of this country is a far greater threat. And my hope is when we come back and take this issue up next week, we'll not just address the one involving Iran, but we'll certainly address in a thoughtful way the actions that the Russians have taken and not let them get away with this. And that's the debate for next week. And the run-up to the debate this week In Iran, actually 2 weeks ago, they had elections, about 3 weeks ago. And I've spoken about this before on the Senate floor. The elections they had were presidential elections. You know, here in this country, we have presidential elections every 4 years, but it turns out they have them in Iran every 4 years as well. In this country, most people of the age 18 and older are eligible to vote. The percentage of people who vote among the electorate who actually vote is not great. It's actually, for the longest living democracy in the history of the world, it's sometimes a bit disappointing. But the percentage of people who turned out to vote in the presidential election in Iran a few weeks ago was approached 75%, which is a good deal higher, I believe, than what we've accomplished in recent years. They have a lot of young people in that country, and the average age is of the 80 million people who work there is under the age of 25. And it turns out that the young people, not like the young people in Vietnam and a bunch of other countries, they like our country. And they want a better relationship with our country. And I think the voting that occurred in Iran 2 or 3 weeks ago actually reflected that. The President Rouhani, who ran on a campaign that included better relations with, among others, the United States. And I think the election of a lot of mayors in places like Tehran, the capital of Iran, which has changed from a hardliner who didn't agree with the President Rouhani's views on this matter, but they were turned out of office. That's all a very encouraging development. There's still people in that country who don't like us, and they wish us harm, wish us ill. They support terrorism. This is a source of concern. But there's particularly with the younger people there, it's a new day there. And I think that's encouraging. We shouldn't be blind to the mischief that some in that country would create, but also not be blind to the encouraging things happening among the young people especially, and reflected in the voting. And we congratulate them on actually having an election where that many people voted. And it's in some of our countries around the world where the faith is folks, where Muslim is the principal faith, they don't allow women to vote. They don't allow women to participate in the elections. They don't allow them to get elected. And in Iran, the elections, I think in Tehran and the city council alone, women do vote in Iran. They get to run for office. I think of the city council in Tehran alone, 6 women were elected to serve on the city council. So that's a positive. So we commend them for having the elections, and it's their job to figure out who they're going to elect. But I'm personally encouraged by the turnout and the participation, especially of women, the election of women, and a president and a lot of young leaders in that country who have a different view of us and their willingness to work with us and other nations like-minded in the future. On the heels of the election, roughly 2 weeks later, there were terrorist attacks in London, in Britain, I think in Australia, in the last couple of weeks, and this last few days in Iran. And their parliament was attacked. Imagine terrorists coming in and attacking those of us who work in this building, whether they happen to be the pages or happen to be the senators or staffs. That's what happened in Tehran a couple of days ago, 10 o'clock in the morning, with folks breaking into Parliament and trying to kill folks. And they also attacked a sacred site, I think a mausoleum in another part of the country. About close to 15 people were killed. Many times that number were wounded, some very seriously. And on the heels of that attack, on the heels of the election, on the heels of the attack by ISIS, and both of the attacks on Iran, the attacks masterminded apparently by ISIS. We don't know for sure, but given ISIS tries to take credit for attacks that they had nothing to do with, or little to do with. But there are people in Great Britain who've lost loved ones, family members, friends, and they are suffering, they're hurting today, they're mourning today. And the same is true of Iran. Great Britain may be one of our 2 or 3 closest allies in the world, and they're like brothers and sisters to us. And we feel a special kinship and loss of life there, and extend our condolences to those whose lives have been ended, whose lives have been shattered, and whose lives will be forever changed. But while we do that with our friends and allies in Britain who suffered from these attacks from ISIS, on the heels of a different kind of election in Iran, an encouraging election in Iran, and similar attacks by ISIS on Iran. And some suggest it's because they have a willingness to actually have a better relationship with us. Maybe that's what drew the attacks by ISIS. In any event, we certainly express our condolences to the people of Iran who've lost their brothers or sisters, their parents, their aunts, their uncles, their friends, and would remember them today. A joint resolution has been drafted by Senator Corker, the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, by Senator Cardin, and it's a resolution. It's not very long. I'm going to read it. It's a resolution that speaks to these attacks and mentions actually both the countries that I've just mentioned, Great Britain, our ally, and Iran, with whom we've had difficult last 30, 40 years, but who's now interested, I think, in a new day with us, and to the extent that we can find ways to work together, especially on terms of commerce. The Iranians want to buy aircraft from us. They want to buy Boeing aircraft. They don't want to buy military aircraft. They have an airline fleet that's just awful. It's decrepit, it's old, it's aged, it's unreliable. They want to buy $10, $12 billion worth of Boeing aircraft, passenger liners. And I would say, let's sell them. And the idea is when we do that, we put not just 5,000 or 10,000 people to work. We provide job and employment opportunities, very good paying jobs for even more people than that in this country. So why wouldn't we be interested in that? And I hope we will allow that to go forward. It's good for us and ultimately good for them, and maybe be able to provide a foundation and working more closely together. I don't know that we'd ever have the kind of relationship that we have with Britain, but as a veteran of the Vietnam War, I can tell you, when I go for a run, Mr. President, and some mornings when I stay down here, go for a run early in the morning, and I run down to the Lincoln Memorial, I always run by the Vietnam Memorial, I take my fingers, and I sort of, as I go along the wall, I let my fingers brush over the names of the people with whom I served, and that were 55,000 of them, they're dead. And they died in that war. And they're our friends, our colleagues, our family members, people that we literally served with at the same time. And they're gone. And yet somehow we've been able to put that behind us, and let bygones be bygones, and develop of course, I guess, friendship with the Vietnamese. And we're their strongest trading partner. They're buying a lot of, particularly aircraft from us these days, and we're now going to sell weaponry to them. We're not going to do anything like that with Iran, certainly with respect to weaponry. But if we can get over, finally, our difficulties and our war and hostilities and so forth with the Vietnamese, maybe someday we can, with change in leadership in Iran, begin to look toward to a more constructive relationship in the future. The other one I want to do, I just want to take this resolution, Mr. President, and actually read that which Senators Corker and Cardin and staffs have worked on, and thank them for their good work. There will probably be a vote later this evening on wrap-up, where there'll be a unanimous consent request that this resolution, bipartisan resolution, be approved. And I think it's a good thing. It's the right thing. It's a fair thing to do. How would we want to be treated by other countries if ISIS attacks us and kills our people? How we want them to be sympathetic and have some feeling for us and not be quiet about it. And so that's essentially what we want to do here. Anyway, the resolution goes something like this, Mr. President. Says, this is a resolution condemning the recent terrorist attacks in the United Kingdom, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Egypt, in Iraq, in Australia, and also in Iran. Offers thoughts and prayers and sincere condolences to all the victims, to their families, and to the people of those countries. Whereas since May 22nd, 2017, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, that's ISIS, has claimed responsibility for multiple terrorist attacks against civilians that have left more than 180 dead and many more wounded. And whereas ISIS frequently claims attacks perpetrated by individuals across perpetrated by individual actors or other groups for propaganda purposes. And whereas the people of the United Kingdom are grieving following the 2 terrorist attacks claimed by ISIS in London on June 4th and Manchester on May 22nd that targeted and killed innocent men, women, and children. Whereas government forces in the Philippines are currently fighting ISIS militants in Mindanao, and including ISIS-affiliated fighters from the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Chechnya, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen, who launched an assault in Marawa City on May 23rd in an apparent choice effort to establish a caliphate in Southeast Asia. Whereas ISIS has claimed responsibility for 2 explosions in Jakarta, Indonesia, killing 3 policemen, whereas ISIS targeted Coptic Christians in Egypt during an attack on a bus on May 22nd, killing 29 people. Whereas 22 people were killed when ISIS detonated a car bomb in Baghdad, an ice cream parlor, killing Iraqi families gathered there with their children to break the Ramadan fast, and then detonated a second bomb, killing elderly Iraqis collecting their pensions. Whereas a terrorist attack claimed by ISIS killed 1 person in Melbourne, Australia, and wounded 3 police officers. And whereas on June 7th, just a few days ago, in an attack claimed by ISIS, at least 12 people were killed when gunmen and suicide bombers targeted Iran's parliament and a sacred shrine. And it's one, I think it's involved, I believe, a mausoleum where one of their earlier leaders is entombed, but a shrine in 2 coordinated attacks across Tehran. And one more whereas, and that's whereas these reprehensible attacks have no place in a peaceful world. And now we have the resolve clause. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Senate, 1, condemns ISIS' horrific terrorist attacks in the United Kingdom, the Philippines, Indonesia, Egypt, Iraq, Australia, and Iran. And number 2, we express our deepest condolences to the victims of these attacks and their families. 3rd, we express solidarity with the people of the United Kingdom, the Philippines, Indonesia, Egypt, Iraq, Australia, and Iran. And 4, recognize the threat posed by ISIS and recommit to U.S. leadership and the global coalition working to defeat ISIS. My father served in World War II. He was a chief petty officer. And most of my uncles served in World War II and or Korea. One of my uncles, I never met him, is my mom's youngest brother, served in the United States Navy. He was stationed on a ship called the USS Sewanee, and it was an aircraft carrier. They were on duty in the Western Pacific, 1944, and their group of ships came under attack by Japanese kamikaze pilots, dive bombing and crashing their aircraft into several ships, including the USS Sewanee, the ship on which my Uncle Bob was stationed. He was 19 years old. I think it's on his ship. They were trying to launch some aircraft to go up and take on the kamikaze pilots before they could do much damage. And several of the kamikaze aircraft apparently crashed into the aircraft carrier in which my Uncle Bob was doing duty up on the deck of the aircraft carrier. His body, along with the bodies of a number of people that were on the deck, were never recovered. They were killed, missing in action for an extended period of time, but their bodies were never recovered. And my grandmother, as I told folks back in Delaware on our Memorial Day observances, my grandmother, I don't know if we have that, you have this in Missouri, Mr. President, but in Delaware, in some of our observances, we have places of honor where our Gold Star families sit. And I told the Gold Star families at a bridge ceremony near Wilmington, near the Delaware Memorial Bridge, I said that I pointed out where the Gold Star families were sitting, and I said, my grandmother, if she was still alive, she'd be 110 today. If she were still alive, but I said she'd be sitting right over there with all of the Gold Star families and mothers. And but she never saw her son again after he went off to serve in the war. A lot of sorrow in that family for years and years and years. They had pictures, as long as I can remember, a picture of him, my Uncle Bob, age 19, sort of frozen in time in his dress blue uniform. And he was, or I was, like a dead ringer for him, a dead ringer for him. And when my sister and I, after we were born in West Virginia, grew up in Danville and Roanoke, Virginia, and went off to Ohio State Navy ROTC midshipman and then off to Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. But I'd go home to visit my relatives in West Virginia, including my grandparents. I'd go back to that house I go back to that picture and I always look at him. As I grew older, the resemblance was pretty remarkable. And my grandmother, from the time I was a little boy until I grew up, would always call me Bobby. That was his name, not mine. I was Tommy, but she would call me Bobby. And kind of eerie. And she would never try to correct it. She'd just call me Bobby. My grandfather, I remember at dinner, my grandfather, sometimes people have nicknames for us as kids, and my grandfather always called me Joe. And so we'd go spend a week or two of them with the summer, and my sister and I, and my grandmother called me Bobby, and my grandfather called me Joe. I wasn't sure who I was when I go back to our home in Danville or Roanoke, Virginia, but I knew my grandmother sure loved her son, Bobby. And the folks that took his life were Japanese. We're Japanese, and in the Navy I've flown plenty of missions with Japanese forces during the Vietnam War and the Cold War, when I was a naval flight officer. And Japan is among our best friends today, among our closest allies. Despite all the hundreds of thousands of lives that were lost at their hands because of their attack on us at Pearl Harbor and the war that ensued. Germany, at the other side of the world, our bitter enemy during World War II, among our closest allies, have been for years, and sort of a bulwark in that part of the world. I mention them to say that the folks that might be our adversaries today, Vietnam, where I served, a great adversary for a number of years, and today, as I said earlier, one of our closest trading partners, and they were one of our partners in I thought a wonderful trade agreement, Trans-Pacific Partnership, that should have been approved by us and never was, negotiated in the last administration. I think in history we'll say that was a huge mistake that we made not to approve what had been negotiated over a period of several years with 11 other countries, including the Vietnamese. But Vietnamese are amazingly close. They love Americans. God, they love Americans. They love us more than we love us. And you could feel it every time I go there. I'm reminded of that. So when things have a way of changing, leadership changes, people change, the attitudes of people toward the rest of the world, including us, will change. And the results of the Iranian election give me some encouragement. I hope they give the rest. And I hope someday some of those young Iranian people who do really love this country, admire this country, might have a chance to come here and visit. The other thing, ironically, today is the last day. We got a lot of young people here in this chamber, Mr. President, who are leaving us, and we call them pages, and some are sitting down here. I walked around earlier today, and we always had these doors around the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 doors, and when we're having votes, a lot of people, senators coming in now, we have 2 pages stationed at every door, and we have pages that are down here at the foot of the presiding officer on either side. And what I try to do is go around and shake hands with the pages and just say goodbye, and to thank them for their service during what's really been, as you know, Mr. President, a challenging time for all of us. And I would say as the last time I have a chance to address these pages as well as the rest of our colleagues here, but I just want to say to our pages, thanks a lot for your service. And we hope that you've been inspired, not by our shortcomings, but by the potential that you see here for us continuing to send this ship of state forward into the future. A lot of people are concerned about the direction our country has taken, and I like to remind them, I just like, especially our pages, to keep in mind that 150 years ago, we fought a civil war in this country. I grew up in Danville, Virginia, the last capital of the Confederacy. And I think some people were still fighting the Civil War when I got there. I was about 9 years old, and my sister was 10. And 150 years ago, Civil War, hundreds of thousands of people killed, many more crippled, wounded, maimed. And after that, we saw our president assassinated, President Lincoln assassinated. And after that, our president who succeeded him, Andrew Johnson, was impeached. And somehow we got through all of that in the 19th century, and when we finally made it to the 20th century, what happened? World War I, fought it, won it, led Allies to victory. World War II, fought it, won it, led the Allies to victory in World War II. Cold War, won it, led our Allies to victory in the Cold War. Great Depression, fought our way out of it, and led the world to a much stronger economy. And when when the 21st century dawned on January 1st, 2001, here's where we were as a nation. Here's where we were as a nation. Strongest economy on earth, a most productive workforce on earth, a nation at peace, 4 balanced budgets in a row. We hadn't balanced our budget since 1968. Last 4 years of the Clinton administration, we're 4-0 in terms of balanced budgets. Since the century began, we were the world's mightiest nation, mightiest force for justice, and we're the most admired nation on the planet. And I would just keep in mind the words of Harry Truman: the only thing new in the world is the history we forgot or never learned. Guy from Missouri, as I recall, like our presiding officer. But we're going through a tough time now. We'll get through it. And my hope is that our pages, who have provided great service here in recent months of their service, will someday come back as interns, maybe someday as staff members, maybe some days as senators and representatives and chiefs of staff, and play other roles in guiding and leading our country. So we thank all of you. And my hope is that as time goes by, that the tensions around the world, the hatred and the vitriol, the murder and the mayhem will have dissipated. And that countries just like Japan, World War II, Germany, World War II, Vietnam War, countries with whom we're bitter enemies at one time, and now are our friends, that maybe we can turn the page with Iran, and they can turn the page with us. And they'll be better for it, and in the end, we will too, and especially your generation will be better for that. And Mr. President, with that, I want to thank Senator Corker, again, Senator Cardin, their staffs. I want to thank our leadership, Senator McConnell, and Senator Chuck Schumer, for making sure that this resolution was taken up and written, worked out, and we have a chance to vote on it. And I just don't want to, sometime later this evening or tonight, when somebody asks for unanimous consent to pass Senate resolution with a certain number on it, that what was that all about? I want people to know that this is about something that's important. And I'm grateful to all who had a hand in it. Thank you very much. I note the absence of a quorum.